Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Menendez. Thank you, General and Ambassador, for being here. Thank you in particular for a lifetime of service to the greatest nation on earth and to the cause of freedom. The sacrifice that you have both made in very different ways, but an enormous sacrifice, putting yourself in harm's way and in danger, often being gone for long periods of time from your loved ones and the country of your heritage is most commendable, and I feel it's an honor to be with you, and an honor to have you willing to serve yet again in a place of great challenge. As we contemplate the outrage of what is occurring in Saudi Arabia and what has occurred there, as we contemplate the extraordinary harm and pain and suffering of civilians in Yemen, and we consider much of what goes on in parts of the Middle East, there is sometimes a sentiment amongst our members and amongst the American people to say, why are we there? Why don't we just leave? Why don't we just get out of the Middle East and let the Sunnis and the Shias and the Iranians and the Saudis do what they're going to do, and we'll just stand back in our hemisphere and just not worry about it? That's not a sentiment that I share, but I'd be interested in the moments we have to hear from both of you as to why we're involved in the Middle East and why we're involved in Yemen, what the significance is of those things for the citizens of the United States. Mr. Tiller, why don't we begin with you?
Thank you very much, Senator. In the case of Yemen, the United States has important interest. We want to ensure that there are no terrorist groups that can arise in Yemen or use the territory there to mount attacks against us or our friends and allies. We want to make sure that there's freedom of navigation through the strategic waterways around Yemen. Much of the world's trade passes through the Bab el-Mandeb, and of course to contemplate that Iran or a hostile power would be able to control that, I think is of great strategic interest to the United States. We want to make sure that our friends and allies in the region have secure borders, that they don't feel that they're being threatened by groups like the Houthis that can act on behalf of Iran as armed proxies in these countries. And then, Mr. Senator, there's another important interest, I think, that as Americans we have, and that is the humanitarian situation. We don't give in to hopelessness. We don't give in to cynicism. I think all of us react the same way when we see pictures, whether it's in Yemen or other parts in the world, where innocent civilians are suffering as the consequences of war or the actions of irresponsible governments. So as the United States, we have an interest in mitigating that humanitarian challenge. One of the things that I often feel badly about is because we have the relationships with Saudi Arabia, and understandably we hold them to a higher account, we do focus on the consequences of Saudi actions in terms, but almost 100% of the humanitarian catastrophe in Yemen has been caused by the Iranian-backed Houthis that overthrew the government, destroyed the institutions of the state, caused approximately a 40% decline in the GDP of the country. I see very, very little reporting, for example, of the millions and millions of mines that the Houthis have planted around the country that in fact have caused more civilian casualties and will continue to cause civilian casualties going into the future. So that's a great concern, and I think the American people need to be concerned about the humanitarian issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Romney. Extremism and sectarian violence is the curse of the Middle East. And extremism, unfortunately, isn't just a curse for the people in the Middle East, it's a curse for all of us. Recently see what happens when an extremist attack happens between two nuclear-armed powers like India and Pakistan. We have a responsibility to do our best to help the people in the region keep extremism from gaining the upper hand. When I think back to the days of the ISIS offensives not far behind us, it was terrifying to me to think of the idea that Iraq could become an ISIS-dominated state. Extremism requires constant work on the part of the good people in the region, and the United States helping people help themselves to defend themselves against it. As long as Iranian state-backed Shia extremism and ISIS and Al-Qaeda type extremism on the Sunni side exist, it's important for us to stay engaged. And it's important for us to move in a direction that allows the people in the region to have a better future so they don't fall prey to the extremist narrative of lies. When I think about the future of the region, if countries can reform, if countries can embrace their own populations, there's a chance for a much better path ahead. I do not, by the way, believe in large presence of American forces in occupation. It's counterproductive to getting the job done. Let's help the people in the region help themselves, and in particular, in the case of Saudi Arabia, their counterterrorism activities in conjunction with our own have been very, very meaningful in putting somewhat of a damper on the extremism that we see so frequently throughout the region.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Romney.